It had only been 3 weeks since I heard any word from David. In the 6 months that we started dating, we had only gone 3 days without talking, and that was after a pretty intense fight. There was nothing out of the ordinary when I had talked to him last. He had just mentioned that he was going to check something out for a friend. Then I got a weird text the night before. It was from David, but it wasn't from his number. It only had 5 words in it. NoEnd, don't come, David. Something was wrong. After I read that text, I felt nauseous, as if I was seeing something I shouldn't. I decided to get a hold of Peter, but I had talked to his ass before. He was a deadbeat, but at least he might have some information on where David might be. I decided to log onto Instant Messenger with David's account. I figured it might be easier to start something with Peter if he didn't know it was me. When I logged on, he immediately messaged me.
David? Holy shit. You had me worried. I thought you went to the house.
What do you mean?
NoEnd house, man. That place I told you about. I could have sworn you were gonna go.
NoEnd. This guy knew what was going on. Yeah, I actually couldn't find it. Maybe I'll try again tomorrow. Where was it again?
No way. You already had me worried. Fuck that place. I've been there. You don't want to go there.
Peter, this is Maggie.
Wait, what? Where's David?
I don't know. I thought you would know, but apparently not.
Oh shit. Oh shit.
What? Seriously, Peter, you need to tell me what's going on.
I think he went to the house. It's outside of down, maybe 4 miles down, Terrence Street. Unmarked road, turn right. Shit, man. He's gone.
No, I don't think he is.
What are you planning on doing?
I'm going to get him back. I left the next night around 8. There wasn't a single car in the entire trip. And as I turned onto the unmarked street, I saw a sign pointed down the road. NoEnd this way. Open 24 hours. My breathing hadn't been steady since I left my house, and seeing the house didn't help anything. There weren't any other cars around, which made me think that it wasn't open. A light from the front stoop illuminated the area, and the windows showed that the lights were on inside. I parked my car and walked up to the front and made my way in. The front lobby was normal enough, but as I predicted, there wasn't anyone there. All the lights were on, but no one was there. Besides the door I came through, there was only one other. Posted next to it was another sign. Room 1, this way. 8 more follow. Reach the end, and you win. That wasn't what made my stomach sink. That wasn't what stopped my heart. There was more below, scrawled and handwritten in red. You won't save him. I must have stood in that lobby for an hour. I was frozen. I didn't know how to go on. Do I go through the door? Do I call the police? After reading that sign, I decided that I might have bit off more than I could chew. I'm an average height for a girl, and I'm pretty thin. I wasn't about to fight off some psycho that was holding David hostage. I decided calling the cops was the best thing to do, so I reached into my pocket and opened my phone to call. No service. The house must be blocking the signal, and it was basically in the middle of nowhere. I walked towards the entrance, figuring I'd find service outside. I reached to the knob and twisted. Nothing. It was locked. I shook harder. Nothing. It was locked from the outside. I slammed my hands against the door and called out to anyone that could hear me. I knew it was useless. No one was out here, except me. Then I felt a vibration in my pocket. I reached down and looked at my phone. One unread text. At first I was really glad I had service. I was saved. Maybe the text was from David, that he was alright, that it was from a different number, one I didn't have in my phone. I pressed open and nearly dropped the phone. You can't save yourself either, My entire body was shaking. I wanted to pass out. I was stuck there. A cell phone with no service, in a room with no exit. My eyes scanned the room and landed on the door across the room. A gold one was mounted on the front. It looked like the room door in a hotel. The ground felt far away as I walked closer to the door. In a few moments I was within inches, and I placed my head against the wood and listened. All I heard was distant Halloween music. This creepy instrumental music you'd hear at any haunted house. Suddenly I got a little calmer. David was always known for his pranks. He would tell me about these elaborate setups that he and his friends would make for the new players on their soccer team. Somehow a smile found its way onto my face, and I opened the door without fear. Entering the first room alleviated my fears even more. The room was completely normal, attempt at a haunted house, even though rather lacking. In each corner was a scarecrow, but not even scary ones. They were the kind you used to see in grade school, with big smiling faces. Paper ghosts hung from the ceiling, and a fan at the corner added a cold breeze that made them spin. Next to the scarecrows was again the only other door in the room. Printed on the front, similar to the first door, was a large 2. I laughed and left this lame room behind me. When I opened the door to room 2, I couldn't see 3 feet in front of me. It was completely filled with a gray mist that smelled like rubber. I guess there had to be some fog machine in here, and it must have been pumping this stuff for hours. There were no windows in this last room, so the ventilation must have been terrible. I walked slowly forward and let out a small shriek. I'd bumped straight into a large robotic Jason Voorhees. His eyes flashed red and the knife in his hand went up and down in a jerking, stabbing motion. My heart was racing, and if anyone was with me, I would have felt incredibly embarrassed. I covered my mouth and made my way past Robo-Jason. The fog was getting a little much. I was beginning to feel lightheaded as I found the door to room 3. I placed my hand to the knob and jerked it back in pain. The knob was extremely hot. I placed my hand on the door itself and felt that it was warm. I couldn't hear anything from the other side, and I put my ear up to the warm wood, expecting to hear a fire, and heard nothing. I assumed it was just a warm, like they were pumping heat into it, like the final room in the Mr. Toad's Wild Ride at Disneyland. I took the corner of my dress and wrapped it around my hand, turning the doorknob as fast as I could, and I flung myself into room 3. There was no fire, just darkness, and it was a freezing cold room. Room 3 wasn't like the other rooms. It wasn't like the other rooms at all. At the moment, I knew something wasn't right. I tried to make out anything in the room, but I couldn't even see my hands grasping for the doorknob that now wasn't there. I was trapped. I must have been turned around in the darkness, even though I didn't move. Once I entered, I must have just gotten lost. In that moment, a light on the ceiling flashed on. A single spotlight, pointing directly down, illuminating a small table. And on that small table was a flashlight. Even though I really couldn't see where I was going, I moved forward. The light on the ceiling was enough to make my way to the table. As I reached the flashlight, I noticed a small tag attached to the handle. To Maggie, from management. The moment I finished reading, the light above me turned off, and I was again left in the darkness. I fumbled with the flashlight for a second before I was able to turn it on. For what seemed like every direction, a low and rumbling hum surrounded me. My heart was pounding and I started to spin in place, darting the beam of the flashlight all around me. There was nothing in the room, but after a while I noticed something terrifying. It could have been my imagination, but I could see a figure dart away at the last second whenever the beam of light hit. I began to panic, and I started backing away from the small table, unsure which direction I was going. The hum was getting louder, and When I started to feel the presence of whatever was dodging the light, my hand shook wildly as I frantically shined the light in whatever direction I could think of. He was always there, just barely escaping back into the darkness every time, but he was getting closer. My eyes started to swell up with tears. I thought I was going to drop the flashlight. I was shaking so badly until I saw it. The light set directly on the small number 4. It was written on a piece of paper and taped to a wooden door in the corner. I ran as fast as I could with the flashlight pointed directly in front of me. I could feel it behind me. The hum was getting louder, and I thought I felt breath on my neck. I was sprinting at this point, only a few more feet to go. In one motion, I grabbed the handle, twisted, and slammed it shut behind me. I was now in the 4th room. I was outside. I wasn't in the house anymore. What awaited me after opening the door to room 4 was what looked like a cave. I looked down to the ground and I noticed something strange and disturbing. The ground wasn't made of grass or rock or dirt. It was wood paneling. It was the same floor as the previous rooms. This was room 4. Somehow I was still in that house. There were a few torches mounted to the side of the rock surrounding me, and the cave beyond was pitch black. The torches looked like they could be taken down, so I walked over to the closest one and unsheathed it from its mounting. My body was covered in sweat, and I slowly made my way into the cave. The hum was gone, hopefully for good. No other noise met me inside the cave, but there was a slight breeze. The cave seemed to go on forever, and I was walking for what felt like hours, until I saw a faint blue light. I walked towards it, cautiously but at a decent pace. The light was an opening at the end of the tunnel. I started walking a little faster. I'd always hated cramped spaces like caves and tunnels. In the few moments the exit was within feet, before I knew it I was at the end. And exactly, that's where I was. The end. At the exit of the cave, the ground dropped off to a cliff. There was no other way to go. I looked back into the dark cave behind me. I knew there wasn't any turns. It was a straight tunnel. I looked, and I turned down over to the edge. What made my stomach turn was what I saw was an ocean, water, all around with nothing else in sight. The drop must have been 100 feet, with a small rock formation at the bottom. After a few seconds of studying the rocks, my stomach turned even more than I thought possible, and my body broke into a fresh sweat. The rocks formed a number. Rocks formed a 5. I stood up and backed away from the edge. I hated heights. I was stopped by a wall that shouldn't have been there. I turned and was met with a terrifying sight. The cave was gone. I was face to face with a solid stone wall, the side of whatever mountain this was. I had to keep telling myself I was still in the NoEnd house. I didn't leave. Clearly this isn't an actual mountain, but it felt so real. I turned back and looked over at the cliff again. There was no way this house was pretty messed up before now. I was outside for God's sake, but it expected me to now do this. This was just too much. I knew those rocks down there were meant. They were the entrance to room 5. There was no stairs leading down, no other paths to use. I was trapped again. The house wanted me to jump. The house wanted me to jump. I sank to the ground and curled into a ball. I couldn't do it. There was no way. I could jump off a cliff onto the jagged rock formation 100 feet below. My mind was split in two. I knew that I was still inside, but my surroundings screamed in my ear the opposite. I stayed there on the wooden ground for a while. At that point, I had lost all concept of time. After what seemed like weeks, I finally stood up. Slowly, I made my way to the edge of the cliff and looked down. The giant 5 taunted me to jump. I knew I couldn't do it, and it taunted me, and then the hum returned, a low and distant hum. It seemed to come from behind me, resonating within the mountain. I don't know what came over me, but after hearing that sound, something inside me lit up. I clenched my eyes shut, and I jumped. The wind was rushing as I fell, and deep fear washed over me. I was going to die. I was going to smash into those rocks and die. They were going to tear me apart, and I was going to die. I didn't care. I opened my eyes. I just fell, even with the loud wind around me. The hum was now deafening. I just wanted it to be over. I just wanted it to be over. I just wanted the rocks to hit me, and I just wanted it to be over. And then I stopped. I wasn't falling anymore, but I never hit the rocks. I opened my eyes and looked around. I was standing on the familiar wood paneling of the house, and the hum was gone, and the silence took its place. I had made it. I was in room 5. I don't know how it happened, but I was in room 5. The feeling of dread was gone. I was just incredibly happy to be alive. After a few moments to collect myself, I decided to look around at the rest of the room. My happiness left me fast. This room was empty. The walls matched the floor, the ceiling matched the walls, and the walls had no doors or windows. I was in a sealed box, and I realized I didn't make it. I wasn't safe. I just made it out of the 4th room, but only to enter room 5, and there was no leaving it. At that moment, I wondered if David had been in this room. I wondered if he had jumped off that same cliff and ended up stuck in this room. And if he did, that means he got out. He wasn't here. I was alone. He got out, and I would too. The thought of David escaping this room gave me newfound confidence, and a second wind filled my spirit. I was going to get out of this room, find David, and get us the hell out of here. I walked around the perimeter of the wall and felt any sort of inconsistencies. Nothing. The walls were flawless, barely a scratch on them, let alone some secret exit. I started to knock at random places on the walls. They were completely solid. The confidence started to leave me. I was running out of ideas. And that's when she spoke to me.
Maggie, you shouldn't have come here, Maggie.
I nearly jumped out of my skin, if that was possible. I was still facing the wall, and the voice had come from the middle of the room behind me. The voice was that of a little girl. At least that's what it sounded like. And I turned around and my eyes fell on who spoke to me. I was right. A little blonde girl, no more than 7 years old, with light blue eyes and a long white dress. She smiled at me and spoke again.
But now that you're here, let's play a game.
There was something horrifying about this little girl. She wasn't scary. She looked completely normal. If I saw her walking down the street, I would have just walked right on by. But looking into her eyes, I felt complete terror. Jumping off a cliff was scary, but I would jump off 20 cliffs twice as high if it meant I could take back 1 minute of looking into her soulless eyes. After a moment of staring, I finally spoke. What game? Who are you?
If you lose, you die.
If I win?
He dies.
My heart sank. I couldn't believe what I was hearing, but I knew she was telling the truth.
Which will it be?
Neither. I don't know where I found the courage to talk back to this child, but I had come too far just to let David die, and if I died, it was all for nothing. No, I choose neither. But then I saw it. The reason that the little girl terrified me. She was more than just a small child. Looking at her, I also saw what appeared to be a large man with the head of a ram. It was a horrible sight. I couldn't unsee one without seeing the other. The little girl stood in front of me, but I knew her true form. It was the worst sight I'd ever seen.
Too bad.
And with that, she was gone. I was alone once again. An empty and silent room, only this time something was added. A small table where she stood appeared from nowhere, as though it was there the whole time. There was something on it, but I couldn't tell from where I was. I walked up to the table and looked at the small object. It looked like a small razor, one you would find in an X-Acto knife. I reached out to pick up, and as I did, a scream left my mouth. When my hand came into view, I saw something that was never there before. It looked as though something was branded into my skin, a single number, 6. I looked back to the razor and noticed the tag attached to it. To Maggie, from the management. Thought you may need this. After reading that note, I started sobbing uncontrollably. Tears were rushing down my face harder than they ever have. And I've never cried like this, and I don't think I ever will. I fell to the ground and sunk my head into the hardwood floor. I was sobbing for hours just lying there on the ground. I don't know why I was crying. It wasn't about David, it wasn't even about how I was stuck here. There were still no doors in this room and I was still trapped. But complete and emotionless, I felt empty. And I clawed my way up from the ground and steadied myself against the table. My eyes fell on the razor and I picked it up. I was going to kill myself. I couldn't handle it anymore. I had had it. David was probably dead. I was trapped in here. It was over. I pressed the razor against my wrist, right above the 6 that had appeared in my skin. Sobbing came back and I just stood there, crying, with the razor pressed against my wrist. David was dead and I was about to die. Nothing mattered anymore. And with one deep cut, I sliced down my wrist. Immediately after slicing down my wrist, I was no longer in room 5. I didn't die. I knew that for sure. The sadness was gone, but I was no means happy. Tears were still finding their way down my face. The room I was in was similar to the previous one again. It had no doors, there weren't any lamps, but somehow I was able to see everything clearly. The room was completely empty. But before I had time to think what to do next, it went dark, and the hum from before returned. I covered my ears in protest. It was louder than it ever was. But it was all over in a moment, and the lights returned. Only this time, something was added to the room. There, in the middle of the room, strung up by chains and naked from the waist up, was David. It looked like he was tortured. Knife wounds littered his chest and arms. David! I ran up to him as fast as I could. He was conscious. I saw his chest move up and down, but he wasn't speaking. That's when I noticed what was etched into his chest. I dropped to my knees as I saw it. The 7 stared at me, as though it had eyes. I heard David try and speak. I tried to get as close as I could to him. David! David, can you hear me?
Maggie.
His voice was quiet, but he was talking.
What are you doing
I
here?
was thankful for that. David, I'm trying to save you. How do I get you down? There were padlocks from the chains holding him in place. I looked around the room for any sort of key, but all I found was the knife in one of the corners. The metal was way too thick for that knife to even dent it, so I disregarded it as useless. I went back to David. It looked like he was on the verge of death. And then I felt my pocket vibrate. As I suspected, one unread text. I flipped open the phone. That isn't me. I didn't know what to think. David was right here in front of me. But the text was from the first number that contacted me. It was from the first text I received from David that mentioned the NoEnd house.
Maggie.
I heard his voice clearly with my ears in my mind. It seemed like his voice was coming from all sides.
You have to go on.
What are you talking about? How? I was face to face with David, or whoever it was that was chained up here.
That knife.
He made a slight movement of his head towards the corner.
Go get it.
I ran and was immediately back with the knife clenched in my hand within a few seconds. I had no idea what was going on, but I needed to save him, and I would do anything.
Don't stab me in the chest.
What? I was shocked. David hung there, staring directly into my eyes.
You have to run that knife through the 7 on my
No.
chest. It's the only way to save us both.
No, you're not making any sense.
Maggie!
He was screaming now. His eyes looked frantic. The side of his mouth curled into a twisted grin.
Maggie! Stab me now, it's the only
I
way!
looked down at the knife in my hand. My head felt as though I was being struck with a bat. I was at a complete loss. I clenched my eyes shut, and I felt the knife in my hand.
Maggie!
With a scream and a thrust, I stabbed the knife into David's chest. I don't know what came over me. I just knew that this was the only way. I opened my eyes and saw his face. I was terrified. Tears slid down his cheeks, and David looked me in the eyes.
Why did you do that?
He couldn't fool me. I know that wasn't David. It couldn't have been, or else I wouldn't have been able to stab him. I know that it wasn't. I know that it wasn't. His eyes rolled back as the life left him. But that's when it changed. The 7 on his body was gone. The blood dripped down on the ground into a pool below me. The crimson liquid stretched out into every direction, and the circle nearly filled the room. And I began to sink. I tried to move, but I couldn't. It was just like quicksand. The blood was up to my knees now. As much as I tried to struggle, I just sank deeper. I clawed and scratched at the wood around me. The lifeless body of David hung above me, his face smiling. The blood reached my neck. I was beyond terrified. Before long, I was submerged, and I fell into darkness. When I woke up, I was outside the house. I could feel the cold earth below me. I rolled onto my back and looked up at the night sky. The NoEnd house towered above me, complete with my car parked in the same spot. I wasn't sure whether I should laugh or cry. I was out. I got up and dusted off my pants. My body was still shaking as I walked to my car, but I still got a feeling of uneasiness. There's no way I escaped. The house wouldn't just let me go. Something was right. I knew it. I knew. I didn't kill David in the 6th room. I knew I didn't, but he was nowhere to be found. I reached down into my pocket and took out my phone. No unread messages, but I had service. I flipped it open and began to text David. "Where are you?" I wrote. Within a second of sending it, I got a reply. "Room 10. Your room. 7. Run." And the deafening hum returned. I bolted. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I wasn't outside. I was still in the house. The hum rattled everything around me. It shook the trees and the air itself. I just needed to find 8. I needed to find the next room. That was my only chance. I needed to find room 8. The first rooms were obvious, but as I progressed, it was getting less and less clear where the rooms started and ended. I had no idea what I was looking for. Anything that had a number on it. I need to find an 8. I need to find an 8. I need to find... Unread text. Your address. What the hell did he mean? My address. The hum was growing louder and louder, and that's what it hit me. My address. Address. It couldn't be. 4896 Forest Inn. Unit 8. I slammed into my car and flung the door open. The hum shook the metal of the car and it seemed to follow me inside. I floored it and made my way back to the dirt road towards my apartment. None of this was making sense. How was room 8 my apartment? Shouldn't I have trusted the text? It was from David. I know it was. There was no reason not to trust it. It took no time at all to drive to my complex, and honestly, I didn't even remember driving. It was like when you zone out for a minute and wake up further down the road. I didn't even bother locking it as I ran up to the front gate. My hands fumbled with the keys and I locked the bolt and made my way to the first hallway on the left. My complex was huge, but my apartment was the first one on the left. I ran as fast as I could. Past 4, past 5. My head was spinning. This night was weighing down on me like a lead vest. Past 6. The further I made it down the hallway, the further away the hum seemed to be. As I passed 7, I could barely hear it anymore. And when I stopped in front of my unit, I was in complete silence. I just stood there, standing in front of my apartment. Small gold 8 was at eye level with me. I reached for the doorknob and slowly slid my key in, twisted, and the door swung open, and I was sucked in like a vacuum, the door slamming behind me. Room 8. I got off the floor and looked around. It was identical to my apartment. If I didn't know any better, I would assume that it was my home, that all this was a bad dream. My mind went to David and I wondered what room 8 was to him. What was it that the house showed him? I walked around and studied the area. Literally everything was how I left it, right down to the half-eaten Chinese left out next to the sink. I looked over at my computer desk in the family room. The monitor was still on, and the instant messenger was still up and running. I walked over and sat in front of it, scrolling through my conversation with Peter. It was there, word for word. The house knew all of this, and I had no idea. To be honest, I tried my hardest not to think about it. The answer, no doubt, something was better off not knowing. I tried to click out of the instant messenger, but it wouldn't let me. The computer just froze. I clicked shut down, nothing. I tried everything. Nothing. And then a pop-up appeared on the screen. It was a video chat. I looked at the list of people in it, and there were 2 names, Maggie and Management. The video feed was live. All it showed was a gray wall. Then a message from Management popped into the text box. Hope everything is how you left it. Who are you? I responded. Enjoy the show. And that's when the camera turned on. The camera focused on a young man strapped to a surgical table. He was completely naked and sobbing quietly to himself. The image wasn't very clear, but I thought I had recognized the man laying there. He was tall, short, brown hair, and a fairly pale complexion. This is what happens when people attempt to cheat. That's when I realized who it was. Strapped to the surgical table was Peter, and he wasn't alone. I don't want to describe what I watched at that moment. The screams the son of Peter made were unlike anything I've ever heard out of a human. But I couldn't look away. I wanted to, but I think it was the power of the room. I couldn't look away. Peter let out one final soul-curdling scream, but I didn't hear it through the computer speakers. It was coming from my room. My heart sank as I spun around towards the hallway. I could still hear the screams emanating as I walked towards the source. I reached my bedroom door, and the screams were now replaced by that hum. That hum. It had haunted me this entire time. I slowly opened the door and I saw inside my room what I had seen on my computer. It was a surgical table, with whatever was left of Peter strewn across its top. No one else was there. The others in the room were gone, but a chill went up my spine. The management was here with me, only one room away. I walked closer to the table. The stench was horrific, and it took me everything to stop from vomiting. I knew I was nearing the end. I had to be. I looked around the room. Somewhere in here was the entrance to the next room. And it was. But it was simpler than I expected. Across the room where my bathroom door should have been was a simple wooden door, similar to the early ones in the house. Something was stapled to the door, something long and bloody. Oh God, it was the entrails of Peter, and they formed a 9 on the door. I felt bad for Peter, but I had gone through hell this night. I walked right past the table, picked up a long surgical knife, and didn't give the body a second glance. The final door was there, and I walked right up to it. This night was about to end, and I was coming out of that room with David. I was going to stop whoever it was that was keeping him here. The door opened easily, and as I stepped through, I saw what was waiting for me. It was an empty room. It resembled a waiting room for a doctor's office. There were a few chairs lining the wall, crumpled up old magazines in a basket in the corner. Across the room, on the opposite side from where I came in, there stood a single door. My heart sank when I read the label printed on the wood. It wasn't a number. It was a single word. Management. I clenched the surgical knife in my hand. Alright, I'm fucking ending this. They were on the other side of that door, and I could feel it, and David was too. The hum was louder than it had ever been. I could feel it inside me. It was coming from inside me. As I walked, it got louder. As I placed my hand on the door, the room was filled with the sound. I turned the knob and opened the door. The room waiting for me was not what I expected. It was the front lobby. The same front lobby that began this entire hell. Only this time, there was someone behind the desk. My heart jumped out of my chest when I saw who it was. It was Peter.
Hello, Maggie.
Peter? No, there's no way. How?
Who were you expecting? A ghost? Satan? Some creepy little blonde girl?
What the hell is going on here?
Maggie, come on. Just think for 2 seconds. Who first told David about this place?
You didn't.
Who told you about David's whereabouts here?
God damn it, Peter, you were his best friend!
I'm sorry, Maggie, but that's how we run business here.
Where is he? Where is he?
He's in here. With us. In the house, Maggie. And he isn't going anywhere. And neither are you.
I don't know what took over me, but I lost it. I jumped over the counter and shoved Peter to the ground. I grabbed him by the hair and slammed his head into the ground, with a surgical knife in my other hand, pressed firmly against his neck. I wanted to kill him. I had to kill him. He killed David. He wasn't killing me.
Maggie, you can't. There's always going to be someone to run the house.
No. I slid the knife across his throat and slammed his head further into the ground. I don't think there will be. With his death, the room went dark. I could still feel the surgical knife, but I was no longer holding on to Peter's hair. I don't know for how long I was in the darkness, but it felt like ages. I stood and felt for the desk, balancing myself, with one hand on the other side of the marble surface. Then the lights came on. I could see the window across the room. It was still night out. I looked out and saw David. He was walking around outside, seemingly unharmed. I ran to the door and tried to open it. I was so happy. But the door wouldn't budge. I tried my hardest, but the door wouldn't let me out. I looked out the window and saw David as he began to walk down the dirt road. I rested my head against the door and saw it. My stomach dropped. There pinned to my chest was a name tag with one word. Management.